Oh, what a day it was in the sleepy little town of Brooksville, where the air carried the scent of oak trees and the promise of neighborly kindness. Marcus Turner, a kind-hearted black man with a heart as big as the sun, never could have guessed that a single act of generosity would turn his quiet life upside down. At 35, Marcus was the kind of soul everyone in town knew and loved, a man who'd stop everything to lend a hand. One evening, as the golden glow of sunset painted the winding roads, he spotted a car pulled over, its hazard lights blinking like a cry for help. A young white woman, Sarah, stood beside it, her face etched with worry. Without a second thought, Marcus pulled over, ready to do what he did best. Could this simple moment really spark a chain of events that would change his life forever? Let's dive into this incredible tale. Marcus was a maintenance technician at the Brooksville Community Center, and let me tell you, that job fit him like a glove. It wasn't flashy, no corner office or fancy title, but it let him pour his heart into helping others. Fixing a creaky door, patching up a leaky faucet, or just offering a warm smile to someone in need, Marcus was the guy you could count on. His co-workers didn't just admire his work ethic, they were in awe of his heart. Why? Because Marcus didn't help people for praise or reward, he did it because it was right. In Brooksville, where life moved slower than molasses, folks waved at each other on the street, and everyone knew your business, whether you liked it or not. It was a place where community meant everything, and Marcus was the glue holding it together. His home was a modest single-story house on the edge of town, inherited from his parents. It wasn't much to look at, but oh, the memories it held. Marcus could still picture his childhood, running wild in the oak-shaded yard, learning the value of hard work and kindness from his mom and dad. Every morning, he'd rise before dawn, brew a steaming cup of coffee, and settle on his porch to watch the sunrise. Can you imagine a more perfect start to the day? That quiet moment, with the world still asleep, was his sanctuary, a slice of peace before the hustle of life kicked in. After his ritual, he'd head to the local diner, where Mrs. Jenkins, the waitress with a twinkle in her eye, had his breakfast ready: scrambled eggs, toast, and crispy bacon. They'd chat about town gossip, the weather, or whatever was buzzing, and Marcus would leave with a full belly and a fuller heart. His days at the community center were packed with tasks that might seem dull to some, but to Marcus, they were pure joy. Fixing a wobbly table, setting up for a town event, or just being a friendly face, every little job felt like a chance to make someone's day better. His coworkers would nudge each other, saying, "That Marcus, he's got a heart of gold." And they weren't wrong. He'd go out of his way for anyone, not for a pat on the back, but because helping was in his bones. That's just who he was. A man who lived for others, finding contentment in the simple, honest life he'd built. But one evening, everything changed.
Marcus was driving home, the sunset casting a warm, golden glow over the quay, winding road.
He loved these drives, the solitude, the chance to let the day's worries slip away. As he rounded a bend, he spotted a car on the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing like a beacon in the fading light. A woman stood nearby, looking lost and frazzled. Marcus didn't hesitate. Why would he? Helping was second nature. He pulled over, hopped out of his truck and called out, "Hey there. Need some help?" His voice was as warm as the evening breeze. The woman looked up, her face a mix of relief and anxiety. She was young, maybe late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her businesslike outfit, a pencil skirt and blouse, was a bit rumpled, like she'd been wrestling with something tough. "Yes, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I've got a flat tire, and I have no idea how to change it. I've been trying, but," she gestured helplessly at the tools scattered on the ground, a picture of frustration. Marcus flashed a kind smile. "No worries at all. I've changed more tires than I can count. We'll have you back on the road in no time." He strode over to the sleek silver sedan, sizing up the situation. The tire was flat as a pancake, completely deflated, and it looked like she'd driven on it a bit too long. Rolling up his sleeves, Marcus got to work, setting the jack in place and lifting the car with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. Can you believe how calm he was? Most folks would have been grumbling, but not Marcus. As he worked, Sarah stood nearby, watching with a mix of gratitude and nerves. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said after a quiet moment. "I didn't know what I was going to do." Her voice cracked, like she was holding back tears. "No problem at all," Marcus replied, glancing up with a reassuring grin. "Glad I could help." He meant it too, every word. Sarah shifted on her feet, her eyes darting around like she was expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said, trying to fill the silence.
Sarah Collins.
"Nice to meet you, Sarah," Marcus said, focusing on loosening the lug nuts.
I'm Marcus.
His hands moved with practiced precision, but he kept the conversation light. Sarah nodded, her face still tense. "I was on my way home from work. It's been a long day, and I guess I didn't notice the tire going flat until it was too late." Her words came out in a rush, like she was trying to explain herself. "It happens," Marcus said, his tone easy. "These roads can be tough on tires, especially if you're not used to them." He was already pulling off the flat tire, moving on to the spare. Sarah let out a small, strained laugh. "Yeah, I'm not from around here. Just moved a few months ago. Still getting the hang of things, I guess." She sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "Brooksville's a great place once you settle in," Marcus said, securing the spare tire. "Folks here are friendly, always ready to lend a hand." He glanced at her, noticing how she kept scanning the road, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Something was off, but Marcus didn't pry. People had their reasons, and he wasn't one to push. In just a few minutes, the spare was on, and Marcus lowered the car, tightening the lug nuts with care. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag from his truck. "There you go," he said, stepping back to check his work. "You're good to go now. Just get that tire fixed soon. The spare's only for short trips." Sarah let out a huge breath, like she'd been holding it the whole time. "Thank you, Marcus." "Really?" she said, her eyes wide with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Marcus shook his head, smiling.
No trouble at all.
"Just happy I was here when you needed me." His humility was something else, wasn't it? Sarah fumbled in her purse, pulling out a small wad of cash. "Please take this," she said, holding it out. "It's the least I can do." Marcus looked at the money, then back at her, his expression gentle but firm. "I can't take that," he said. "Helping someone in need is enough for me."
Can you imagine turning down cash like that?
But that was Marcus, pure heart through and through. Sarah blinked, clearly thrown. "Are you sure? It's not much, but I want to show you how much this means." She sounded almost desperate to repay him. "I'm sure," Marcus said, his eyes kind. "Just drive safe and get that tire fixed. That's all the thanks I need." His voice was so steady, so sincere, it left no room for argument. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out what kind of person says no to money. Finally, she nodded, slipping the cash back into her purse. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly.
You won't forget this.
"You're welcome," he replied, giving her a nod.
Take care now.
With that, he headed back to his truck, watching as Sarah got into her car and started the engine. She gave him one last look, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something Marcus couldn't quite place, before driving off into the evening. As Marcus climbed into his truck, he replayed the encounter in his mind. Helping folks wasn't new to him, he did it all the time. But there was something about Sarah that stuck with him. Was it her nervous glances? The way she seemed to be running from something? He couldn't put his finger on it, but it nagged at him. Shrugging it off, he started his truck and headed home. People had their own troubles, and it wasn't his place to dig. He'd done what he always did, helped someone, and that was enough. Or was it?
The sky darkened I drove, the last ray of sunlight fading into the horizon.
Marcus was tired, ready for a quiet night at home, but a tiny voice in the back of his mind whispered that this wasn't the end. Could one good deed really lead to something bigger? For now, he pushed the thought aside. Tomorrow was a new day, and whatever it brought, Marcus would face it with the same kindness and strength that guided him every day. Pulling into his driveway, he took a deep breath, savoring the evening's peace. He'd done a good deed, just like always. But oh, how wrong he was to think it was just another day. The next morning, Marcus woke to the cheerful chirping of birds outside his window, the sun casting a warm glow across his cozy bedroom. It felt like any other day in Brooksville, routine, familiar, comforting. He stretched, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and swung his legs out of bed, the cool floor waking him up as he shuffled to the kitchen.
Coffee time.
He brewed a fresh pot, the rich aroma filling the air, and leaned against the counter, ready to start his day. But as he glanced out the window above the sink, something caught his eye. A sleek black SUV was parked across the street, its shiny exterior gleaming in the morning light.
What in the world?
It looked out of place in Brooksville, where folks drove beat-up trucks or sensible sedans. Marcus frowned, his gut telling him something wasn't right. Was it just a visitor?
A random car?
He shook his head, trying to brush it off, but the SUV stayed on his mind, a quiet hum of unease that wouldn't quit. Oh, what a strange twist of fate was unfolding in the quiet town of Brooksville. As the rich aroma of fresh coffee filled Marcus Turner's cozy kitchen, he leaned against the counter, gazing out the window above the sink. The street outside was calm, with only a handful of early risers strolling through the crisp morning air. But then his eyes caught something unusual, a sleek, shiny black SUV parked right across from his house.
Can you believe it?
In a place like Brooksville, where folks drove rusty pickups or practical sedans, this fancy vehicle stuck out like a sore thumb. Marcus's brow furrowed, a tiny spark of curiosity flickering in his chest. Was it just a visitor?
Maybe someone new in town?
He shook his head, telling himself it was nothing, and poured his coffee, the steam curling up like a warm hug. But oh, how that SUV would soon turn his world upside down. Settling at his kitchen table, Marcus flipped through the morning paper, the headlines blurring as his mind wandered back to the mysterious vehicle. He sipped his coffee, its warmth grounding him, but his eyes kept darting to the window. There it was, still parked, silent and unmoving, like it was waiting for something, or someone. Why hadn't it budged? Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, and Marcus's curiosity grew into a quiet unease. It wasn't like him to get caught up in other people's business. Live and let live, that was his motto. But something about that SUV felt off. He tried to push the feeling away, muttering to himself, "Come on, Marcus, it's just a car." But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that this was no ordinary morning. After a hearty breakfast of eggs and toast, Marcus grabbed his keys, locked up his modest home, and stepped onto the porch. The cool morning air brushed his face, but his gaze locked onto the SUV again. Those tinted windows were like dark, unreadable eyes, hiding who knows what inside. Was someone in there, watching him? The engine was off, the car lifeless, yet it loomed in his mind like a storm cloud. Shaking his head, Marcus forced a chuckle. "You're being ridiculous," he told himself, striding to his truck. He had a full day at the community center ahead, leaky faucets to fix, doors to repair, and a big event to set up. No time to get distracted by some random car that probably had nothing to do with him. But as he climbed into his truck and started the engine, he couldn't resist one last glance. The SUV sat there, still and silent, like it was daring him to wonder. What was its deal? Pulling out of his driveway, Marcus hit the road, the familiar hum of his truck soothing his nerves. He arrived at the community center, where the bustle of activity greeted him like an old friend. Staff members scurried about, preparing for the day's events, and their warm smiles lifted his spirits. "Morning, Marcus," called Denise, the receptionist, her voice bright as she waved from her desk. "Morning, Denise." Marcus shot back, his grin as genuine as ever. "Everything running smoothly today?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "As smooth as it can be." Denise chuckled, rolling her eyes. "You know how it is." Marcus nodded, his heart warmed by the easy camaraderie. This was his place, his people, and he loved every second of it. He made his way to the maintenance room, where his tools waited like loyal companions. Today's to-do list was a familiar one: fix a dripping faucet in the bathroom, mend a door that had slipped off its hinges, and help set up for an event in the main hall. Simple tasks, but to Marcus, they were everything. Each wrench turned, each nail hammered, was a chance to make the center a better place for his community. He dove into his work, the rhythm of it usually enough to clear his mind. But today? Oh, today was different. His thoughts kept drifting back to that black SUV. Why was it still nagging at him? It was just a car, parked for too long, right? But the image of it, sleek, silent, and somehow menacing, clung to him like a shadow. The more he thought about it, the more his stomach twisted. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to him. By lunchtime, Marcus's unease had grown into a full-blown distraction. He needed to clear his head. Stepping out of the community center, he decided to walk to the local grocery store for a sandwich and some fresh air. The short stroll through Brooksville's charming streets usually calmed him, with kids playing in yards and neighbors waving hello. But as he neared the store, his heart skipped a beat. There it was. The black SUV, parked across the street, its tinted windows glinting in the sunlight. No way. Was this really happening? It was the same one, no doubt about it, with that same sleek, unsettling vibe. Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. That SUV was following him. For a moment, he just stood there, staring, his mind racing. Should he march over and demand answers? What if he was overreacting? Could it really just be a fluke? But deep down, Marcus knew better. His gut screamed that something was up. Taking a shaky breath, he walked into the store, grabbing a sandwich from the deli with trembling hands. As he paid at the counter, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Who was in that SUV? Why were they tailing him? He stepped outside, stealing another glance across the street. The SUV hadn't moved, its presence now a dark, looming shadow over his day. What did they want from him? Instead of heading back to work, Marcus decided to test his suspicions. He took a winding route through town, passing the park with its laughing children, the library with its quiet charm, and a few other local spots. Each time he turned a corner, he checked behind him, his heart pounding. Sure enough, there it was, the SUV, always close but never too close, like a predator keeping its distance. Oh, this was real. Someone was following him, and they didn't want to be seen. By the time Marcus looped back to the community center, his unease had morphed into a gnawing anxiety that clung to him like damp clothes. He tried to focus on his work, but it was no use. His eyes kept drifting to the windows, half expecting to see that black SUV parked outside, watching, waiting. The rest of the day dragged on in a blur, each task feeling heavier than the last. When it was finally time to head home, Marcus's chest felt tight, like a weight was pressing down on him. He left the community center, scanning the streets for any sign of the SUV. Nothing. Was it really gone? He drove home, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see those tinted windows trailing him. But the drive was quiet, and by the time he pulled into his driveway, the SUV was nowhere in sight. For a fleeting moment, Marcus let himself relax. Maybe it was over. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. But as he stepped out of his truck and headed toward his front door, something caught his eye. Oh no. The black SUV was back, parked at the end of his street, just far enough to stay out of sight unless you were looking for it. His heart thundered in his chest as he stared at it, trying to make sense of this madness. What was going on? He stood frozen for minutes, his mind racing. Should he confront them?
Call the police?
The Brooksville cops were good folks, but would they take this seriously? And confronting whoever was in that SUV, someone clearly hiding, felt like walking into danger. Marcus's palms were sweaty, his breath uneven. In the end, he decided to go inside and wait. He locked the door behind him, the click of the bolt sounding louder than usual, and moved to the window, peering out at the SUV. It hadn't moved, but its presence was like a storm cloud hanging over his home. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was terribly wrong. That night, sleep was a distant dream. Marcus tossed and turned. The image of the SUV burned into his mind. Those tinted windows, hiding who knows what secrets, haunted him. Every creak of the house made him jump, and he kept checking the window, hoping, praying, the SUV would be gone. But there it was, a silent sentinel watching his every move. By morning, Marcus was groggy, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He dragged himself to the kitchen, brewing another pot of coffee, but the comfort of his routine was gone. Sitting at the table, he stared out the window. The SUV was gone. But Marcus wasn't fooled. It would be back, he knew it in his bones. As he sipped his coffee, Marcus wrestled with his options. He couldn't live like this, always looking over his shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to face whoever was in that SUV. Later that day, after a half-hearted attempt to focus at the community center, Marcus made up his mind. He left work early, his heart pounding with resolve. Driving home, he kept his eyes peeled, expecting the SUV to appear at any moment. And there it was, parked at the end of his street, just as he'd feared. His pulse raced as he pulled into his driveway, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles ached. What was he going to say? What was he walking into? Stepping out of his truck, Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself. He started walking toward the SUV, each step heavy, his heart thumping like a drum. The closer he got, the more his nerves buzzed, like a live wire sparking in his chest. What would he find? When he was just a few feet away, the driver's side window rolled down slightly. Marcus caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure behind the tinted glass, but no details, just a vague, ominous shape. He opened his mouth to speak, to demand answers, but before a single word could escape, the SUV's engine roared to life. The vehicle peeled out, tires screeching as it sped down the street and vanished around the corner. Marcus stood there, stunned, his heart still racing.
What just happened?
The confrontation he braced for was over before it began, leaving him with nothing but questions and a sinking feeling that this was far from over. Oh, what a whirlwind of emotions was swirling through Marcus Turner's heart as he stood frozen on that quiet Brooksville street, his pulse racing like a runaway train. The black SUV had just sped off, tires screeching, leaving him with nothing but the echo of its engine and a head full of questions.
Can you imagine?
He braced himself for a confrontation, ready to demand answers, only for the mysterious figure inside to vanish before he could utter a single word. As he trudged back to his modest home, each step heavy with uncertainty, Marcus couldn't shake the chilling certainty that this was far from over. Whoever was in that SUV had gone to great lengths to trail him, lurking in the shadows of his peaceful life. Why? What did they want? The mystery was just beginning, and Marcus knew, deep in his bones, that he was in for something far bigger than he'd ever bargained for. That night, sleep was a cruel stranger. Marcus tossed and turned, his mind a storm of restless thoughts. The image of that sleek, ominous SUV and the shadowy figure behind its tinted windows haunted him. What was coming? Something big, something life-altering, was looming on the horizon, threatening to upend the quiet, contented existence he'd built in Brooksville. As the first rays of morning sun slipped through the blinds, casting soft golden streaks across his bedroom, Marcus let out a heavy sigh. Was he ready for whatever today might bring? Answers, maybe, or more questions. Either way, he felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. Dragging himself through his morning routine, Marcus brewed his coffee, the familiar ritual offering little comfort. He nibbled on toast, but his appetite was gone, his thoughts consumed by the SUV. Desperate to clear his head, he decided to take a walk. The crisp morning air nipped at his skin, but it did nothing to soothe his frazzled nerves. Still, the sights and sounds of his neighborhood, children giggling as they played in yards, neighbors waving with warm smiles, wrapped him in a fleeting sense of normalcy. For a moment, it felt like any other day in Brooksville. Could things really go back to the way they were? But as he rounded the corner toward his house, that fragile hope shattered. There it was, the black SUV, parked in the exact same spot as before. His heart sank, a cold knot tightening in his chest. But this time, something shifted inside him. The dread was still there, but it was joined by a fierce determination. Enough was enough. He needed to know who was behind this and why they were so fixated on him. Standing on his front porch, Marcus stared at the SUV, his jaw set. Then something caught his eye, movement. Two men in sharp, tailored suits stepped out of the vehicle, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement. They moved with an air of authority, their faces calm and composed, like they owned the world. Who were these guys? As they approached, Marcus's pulse quickened, his mind racing with possibilities. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," the older man said, his voice smooth as silk, though it sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He was tall, with graying hair slicked back neatly, and his polished tone screamed trouble. The younger man, with a steely gaze that could cut glass, stood silently beside him, his presence just as unnerving. What did they want with him? "Morning," Marcus replied, his voice cautious, almost a whisper. He crossed his arms, trying to look calm, but inside he was a mess, questions tumbling over each other like leaves in a storm. The older man flashed a smile, but it was cold, never reaching his eyes. "Allow me to introduce myself," he said.
I'm James Bennett, and this is my associate, Monsieur Turner.
"We represent the Montgomery family." Marcus's brow furrowed. The Montgomery family? The name meant nothing to him. Was this some kind of mistake? Bennett's voice flowed on, slick and practiced. "Yes, I believe you had a brief encounter with one of their family members recently."
Miss Sarah Montgomery.
Marcus's eyes widened, his breath catching. Sarah? The woman he'd helped with the flat tire? Memories flooded back, the dark road, her nervous glances, the way she'd seemed so desperate. Sarah Montgomery, he murmured, more to himself, stunned. I didn't realize, Bennett nodded, as if he'd expected this. Sarah is the daughter of Mr. Richard Montgomery, he said, his tone heavy with meaning. A name you might recognize. He's a well-known businessman, a billionaire, in fact. A billionaire? Marcus's mind reeled, struggling to process this bombshell. The woman he'd helped, just out of the goodness of his heart, was the daughter of a billionaire? How was that even possible? I didn't know, Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, still trying to wrap his head around it. Bennett waved a hand dismissively, his smile tight. No, of course you didn't. Miss Montgomery didn't share her identity with you, and we understand why. It was a stressful situation, and she was likely more concerned with getting home safely. Marcus nodded, at a loss for words. This was surreal. He'd just done what any decent person would, stop to help someone stranded, and now here were these men, representatives of some powerful family, standing on his porch like they'd stepped out of a movie. What was happening to his simple life?
What do you want from me?
Marcus asked, his tone guarded, his heart pounding. Bennett's smile widened, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. We're not here to ask anything of you, Mr. Johnson. Quite the opposite, actually. We're here to offer you something. Offer him something? Marcus's suspicion flared, a warning bell ringing in his mind. What could you possibly offer me? He said, his voice sharp with doubt. This didn't feel right, not one bit. Turner, the younger man, finally spoke, his voice firm and direct. We're here to reward you, Mr. Johnson, for your kindness, your selflessness. The Montgomery family doesn't take such acts lightly. Reward him? For what? Marcus's frown deepened, his thoughts racing. I just helped her change a tire, he said, shaking his head. Anyone would have done the same. That may be true, Bennett said, stepping closer, his voice earnest. But you did it, Mr. Johnson. You stopped, you helped her, and you asked for nothing in return. That means something to the Montgomerys. Marcus shook his head, still not getting it. I don't need a reward, he said firmly. I was just doing what I thought was right. Bennett's eyes gleamed, like he'd been waiting for that. And that's precisely why they want to reward you, he said, his tone almost too sincere. Your actions, your character, they stand out in a world where so many would have just driven by. The Montgomery family appreciates that. Appreciates it? Marcus scuchant. These guys were too smooth, too polished, like salespeople pitching a deal too good to be true. He didn't trust them, not for a second. What kind of reward are we talking about? Marcus asked, his voice cautious, every word measured. He wasn't about to get tangled up in something he didn't understand, especially with people who radiated power and influence. Bennett exchanged a quick glance with Turner, a silent signal that set Marcus's nerves on edge. That, Mr. Johnson, is up to you, Bennett said. The Montgomerys have the means to change your life in ways you can't even imagine. They could offer you money, a new home, a better job, whatever you desire. Money? A new home?
Marcus's eyes narrowed.
This was too much. And what's the catch? He shot back, his skepticism clear. Nothing this big came without strings, especially not from people like the Montgomerys. No catch, Bennett assured him, but his smooth tone only deepened Marcus's doubts. This is simply their way of saying thank you, a gesture of goodwill.
Marcus scoffed softly.
Nothing's ever free, he said, shaking his head. Especially not from people like the Montgomerys. Bennett's smile faltered, just for a moment, but he recovered quickly. I understand your hesitation, Mr. Johnson, but I assure you, there are no strings attached. You did something good, and the Montgomerys want to repay that kindness.
No string?
Marcus didn't buy it. The temptation was there. Who wouldn't dream of an easier life, free from bills and worries? But a voice deep inside, loud and clear, warned him that accepting this offer would come at a cost, one he might not be ready to pay. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest, but I'm not interested. Bennett and Turner exchanged a look, this one less polished, almost startled. Turner's jaw tightened, like he wanted to argue, but Bennett raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Johnson," Bennett said, his tone calm but edged with insistence, "perhaps you should take some time to consider. This isn't an opportunity that comes along every day." "Take time?" Marcus's resolve hardened. "I don't need time to consider," he said firmly. "I'm not interested. I live a good life, and I'm happy with what I have."
"I don't need anything from the Montgomery."
Was that clear enough? He hoped so, because he meant every word. Turner's eyes narrowed, a flicker of frustration crossing his face, but Bennett stepped in, his smile returning, though it was colder now, like ice. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. We respect your decision," he said, but his tone didn't match his words. Marcus nodded, relief washing over him. Thank goodness they weren't pushing harder. "Thank you for understanding," he said, his voice softer now. Bennett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, handing it to Marcus. "If you change your mind, or if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out," he said. "The Montgomerys are always willing to help those who show kindness." Marcus took the card, glancing at its simple, elegant design. Just a phone number, nothing else. He nodded, slipping it into his pocket more out of courtesy than intent. "Call them?" "Not likely." Bennett and Turner gave a curt nod, their businesslike demeanor snapping back into place. "We'll take our leave now, Mr. Johnson," Bennett said, turning toward the SUV.
"We wish you all the best."
Turner followed, but not before throwing Marcus one last glance, his expression unreadable, like a puzzle Marcus couldn't solve. As the SUV pulled away, its engine a low growl fading into the distance, Marcus stood on his porch, the card still in his hand. His mind was spinning, a whirlwind of shock and suspicion. The Montgomerys weren't done with him, he could feel it. They were powerful, the kind of people who didn't take no for an answer. Would they really let this go? Inside his house, Marcus clutched the card, staring at it like it held the key to a dangerous secret. Should he keep it? Toss it? Part of him wanted to chuck it in the trash, erase this bizarre encounter from his life. But another part, curious, maybe even a little scared, urged him to hold on, just in case. Finally, he tucked it into a kitchen drawer, out of sight but lingering in his thoughts. He tried to go about his day, fixing a shelf, chatting with a neighbor, but the meeting with Bennett and Turner clung to him like a fog. Their promises of life-changing rewards, money, power, influence, sounded like a dream. But was it a dream worth chasing? What would it be like to live without worries, to have everything he'd ever wanted? Yet Marcus knew himself too well. Those things wouldn't make him happy. His simple life, his community, his values, that was enough. Or was it? Oh, what a storm of emotions was churning in Marcus Turner's heart as he stood in the quiet of his Brooksville home, grappling with the weight of a decision that could change everything. He knew himself better than anyone. Money, power, a fancy new life? Those things wouldn't spark joy in his soul. No way. Marcus had always found happiness in the simple rhythm of his days, the warmth of his community, and the honest work that filled his heart. Trading that for some glittering promise of better? Not a chance, not even for all the wealth the Montgomerys could dangle before him. Yet, as the day wore on, pushing the strange encounter with those slick-suited men out of his mind was like trying to shove a boulder uphill. He threw himself into what mattered, hanging out with his buddies, laughing over old stories, tinkering with a squeaky door hinge at home, even lacing up his sneakers for an evening jog under the pink-streaked sky. The cool air stung his lungs, but oh, it felt good to move. Still, no matter how fast he ran, a nagging feeling clung to him like a shadow. The Montgomerys weren't done with him. Could they really let him walk away? He knew they'd be back, and when they came, he'd need to be ready. Ready for what, though?
That night, Marcus lay in bed, the darkness pressing in asleep dansait just out of reach.
His mind was a whirlwind, replaying every word from Bennett and Turner, their smooth voices, their two perfect promises of a life transformed. It felt like a scene from a movie, some surreal dream that had crashed into his ordinary world. But as he stared at the ceiling, the truth hit him hard. This was no dream. The Montgomerys were real, their interest in him as tangible as the worn quilt draped over his bed. Why him? What did they really want? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a fear of the unknown that kept his eyes wide open, long past midnight, the quiet of the night amplifying every creak and whisper in his house. Still awake as the hours dragged on, Marcus's thoughts spun like leaves in a storm. The visit from those men had shaken him to his core, and despite his firm no, their offer lingered like a tune he couldn't shake. Money, a new home, a life without worries. Could it really be that simple? The idea of being rewarded for a single act of kindness, something he'd done without a second thought, felt so foreign, so out of place in his world. Marcus had built his life on unshakable principles, humility, integrity, and the belief that doing right didn't come with a price tag. Helping Sarah that night wasn't about getting something back, it was just who he was. Yet, the Montgomerys' wealth and power held an undeniable pull, a whisper of possibilities that teased his imagination. What would it be like to live without the grind, to have the means to do even more good? As the night stretched on, Marcus's mind wandered through the years he'd spent in Brooksville. He thought of the long days working at the community center, the calluses on his hands from fixing what was broken, the quiet joy of seeing a neighbor's face light up with gratitude. He didn't crave luxury or fame, never had. Fulfillment came from the bonds he'd forged, the laughter shared with friends, the way his small town wrapped him in a sense of belonging. But now, his life felt like it was teetering at a crossroads. That split-second choice to stop and help Sarah on that dark road had set off a chain reaction, one he never could have seen coming. And the decision looming before him now? It felt heavier than anything he'd ever faced. Could he stay true to himself, or would this change everything? Unable to lie still any longer, Marcus slipped out of bed, the cool floorboards creaking under his feet. He shuffled to his small living room, the familiar space lit only by the soft glow of a street lamp outside. Sinking onto his worn couch, he ran a hand through his hair, his heart heavy with questions. This wasn't a choice he could make alone. He needed the people who knew him best, the ones who'd seen him through every high and low. Who could he turn to? His mind raced to his closest confidants, and he knew what he had to do. By morning, Marcus was bleary-eyed but determined. Over a steaming cup of coffee, he reached out to his inner circle, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. He didn't spill much over the phone, just that he needed their advice, something big. By early afternoon, they'd gathered in his living room, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity that warmed his heart. There was Derek, his childhood friend who'd been like a brother since they were kids, always ready with a laugh or a listening ear. Angela, his sharp-witted sister, whose no-nonsense attitude cut through any nonsense like a knife. And Aunt Clara, the wise matriarch whose life had seen more twists and turns than a country road. They sat around his small coffee table, their eyes fixed on him, waiting. Can you feel the tension in that room? So, what's this all about? Derek asked, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, his voice laced with worry. You sounded pretty serious on the phone, man. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands clasped tight to steady himself. Where to begin? Something happened a few days ago, he started, his words careful as he recounted the night he'd helped Sarah, her flat tire, her nervous glances, the way she'd seemed so lost. Then came the visit from Bennett and Turner, their polished suits and their jaw-dropping offer. As he spoke, he watched their faces. Derek's brow furrowed in thought, Angela's eyes narrowed with suspicion, and Aunt Clara nodded slowly, like she'd seen this story coming from a mile away. Oh, how their reactions told a story of their own. When Marcus finished, a heavy silence settled over the room, thick and charged. Angela broke it first, her voice sharp and direct. So let me get this straight. These guys showed up at your house, offering you a reward because you helped some rich girl on the side of the road? Marcus nodded, his throat tight. That's right. But it wasn't just any reward. They made it sound like they could change my life. Money, a new house, whatever I wanted. Derek let out a low whistle, his eyes wide. Man, that's some serious stuff. And you just turned them down?
Just like that.
His voice was a mix of awe and disbelief. Yeah, Marcus said, but doubt crept into his tone, betraying the turmoil inside. I told them I wasn't interested, that I didn't want anything from them. But I don't know. Something about it doesn't sit right. Angela leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression hard. Of course it doesn't sit right. These people don't offer something for nothing, especially not with that kind of money and power. There's always a catch, always. Her words were like a slap, sharp and true. Aunt Clara spoke next, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of her years. I agree, she said. In my experience, when someone offers you the world, they expect something back. And it's not always something you're willing to give. Oh, her wisdom cut straight to the heart. Derek nodded, but his tone was softer, thoughtful. Still, it's not every day you get an offer like that, Marcus. I mean, they could change your life. No more worrying about bills, no more scraping by. Doesn't that count for something? Angela shot him a look, her voice rising. And what would he have to give up, Derek? His independence? His peace of mind? We don't know these people. We don't know what they're really after. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples as their voices swirled around him, a tug-of-war of opinions that only muddied the waters. He'd hoped this talk would bring clarity, but it was like wading through quicksand. Why was this so hard? Look, Marcus said finally, his voice cutting through the debate, I didn't bring you all here to argue. I just needed your perspectives because I'm torn. On one hand, I know I could use the help they're offering. Who couldn't? But on the other, I'm scared of what it might cost me in the long run. Aunt Clara reached over, her hand warm and steady on his arm. You're a good man, Marcus, she said softly. You've always done what's right, and that's why this is weighing on you. But remember, it's not just about what you might gain, it's about what you could lose. Her words landed like a lifeline, pulling him back to his core. Could he hold on to who he was, no matter what? Before he could respond, a sharp knock at the door froze everyone in their seats. Who could that be? They exchanged puzzled glances, the air thick with tension. Marcus stood, his heart racing like a drumbeat as he moved to answer. He wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything, the SUV, the men, the offer, his nerves were on edge. What now? He opened the door, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing there was Sarah Montgomery, the very woman he'd helped that night. She looked different, more composed, her blonde hair neatly pulled back, but her eyes held a weariness that hadn't been there before. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice thick with surprise. What are you doing here? I'm sorry to show up like this, Sarah replied, her voice soft but urgent, but I need to talk to you. Can I come in? Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. What could she want? But he stepped aside, letting her in. As Sarah entered the living room, the others eyed her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, their gazes sharp. She glanced around, clearly sensing the tension, and offered a polite nod. Hello, she said, her voice steady despite the weight in the room. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really needed to speak with Marcus. Marcus guided her to a seat, his heart still pounding. It's okay, he said. We were just talking about, well, everything that's happened. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath as she sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I figured as much, she said. That's why I'm here. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus. Something I didn't mention before. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He'd known there was more to her story, but to have her here, ready to spill it? What is it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face before locking onto his. The night you helped me, it wasn't just a flat tire I was dealing with. I was running away.
Running away.
Derek blurted, his voice thick with shock. From what? Sarah's expression tightened, her eyes dropping to her hands, fingers twisting nervously. From my family, she said, her voice trembling. Or more specifically, from the people my family is involved with. You see, my father, he's a powerful man, but he's made dangerous enemies over the years. People who wouldn't hesitate to use me to get to him. Marcus felt a chill race down his spine, his breath hitching.
Dangereux ennemi?
This was way bigger than he'd ever imagined. A simple act of kindness had pulled him into something dark and tangled. The night you found me, Sarah went on, her voice steadier now but heavy with emotion. I just escaped from a situation where I was being held by people trying to leverage my father's power. They were dangerous, and I knew I had to get away. That's why I was so desperate, so scared. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in like stones. Marcus could barely wrap his head around it. The woman he'd helped, the one he'd thought was just stranded, had been running for her life? Caught in a web of power and intrigue he couldn't even fathom? It was like something out of a thriller, yet here it was, in his living room. Oh, what a tangled web of emotions was weaving itself around Marcus Turner's heart as he sat in the quiet of his Brooksville home, grappling with a decision that felt like it could reshape his very soul. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, her trembling voice a haunting reminder of the danger lurking behind her family's glittering offer. I didn't tell you any of this because, well, I didn't want to drag you into it, she'd said, her eyes shimmering with fear and gratitude. But now I realize you're already involved, whether you want to be or not. And that's why I'm here, to warn you. Warn him? Marcus's mind spun like a top, questions crashing over him like waves. What had he stumbled into? His simple act of kindness, helping a stranded woman with a flat tire, had pulled him into a world of power and peril he could barely comprehend. As Sarah met his gaze, her concern as deep as the night sky, she said, "They're not bad people, but they're powerful, and they're desperate to protect me. That's why they sent those men to you, to try to repay you. But Marcus, you need to understand, accepting their offer might come with consequences. You could be drawn into something far more dangerous than you realize."
Dangereux?
His throat tightened, a cold knot of fear twisting in his chest. The Montgomerys' offer, wrapped in promises of wealth and ease, suddenly felt like a trap, its shiny surface hiding sharp edges.
What should he do?
Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, raw with uncertainty. Sarah hesitated, then reached out, her hand warm and steady on his. "I can't tell you what to do, Marcus," she said softly, "but whatever choice you make, do it for yourself, not for them. Don't let them control your life, no matter how tempting their offer might be." Her words hit him like a thunderbolt, resonating deep within his core. Marcus had always been his own man, living life on his terms, guided by a compass of integrity and independence. The thought of losing that, of being swept into the Montgomerys' world of wealth and power, filled him with a dread that churned in his gut. Could he hold fast to who he was, or would this choice swallow him whole? Before he could respond, Sarah's voice softened, thick with emotion. "And Marcus, thank you," she said, her eyes glistening. "What you did for me that night, it meant more than you'll ever know. You saved me, not just from a flat tire, but from something much darker. For that, I'll always be grateful." Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing a sincerity that pierced his heart. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just about rewards or risks, it was about the impact his actions had on another person's life, the ripples that had spread from that one moment of kindness. How could something so simple lead to something so profound? They sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down like a storm cloud, heavy with possibilities he couldn't yet grasp. As evening fell and his friends and family began to leave, their voices fading into the night, Marcus remained lost in thought. He walked Sarah to the door, her presence a stark reminder of the complexity of this mess he'd stumbled into.
Take care, Marcus, she said softly, stepping into the cool night air. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Whatever happens, you have people who care about you. Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, but the weight of them lingered as he watched her disappear down the steps, her figure swallowed by the darkness. Could he really lean on those he loved, or was this his burden to carry alone? He closed the door, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in his chest, and stood alone in his quiet house, the silence roaring with a decision he had to make. This choice, between the simple life he cherished and a world of power and unknown dangers, would define his path forward. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Morning broke with a soft glow streaming through Marcus's kitchen window, the early light casting long shadows across his table. He sat there, a steaming mug of coffee untouched, his mind a battlefield of doubt and determination. The past few days replayed in vivid detail, the black SUV's ominous presence, the polished menace of Bennett and Turner, Sarah's urgent warning, and that life-altering offer. It could change everything. But at what cost? Marcus had always prized his independence, the freedom to live by his own rules, unswayed by wealth or power. The thought of being entangled in the Montgomerys' world, with its glittering promises and hidden threats, made his stomach churn. Yet, he couldn't ignore the good he could do with their resources. Imagine a community lifted up, kids with brighter futures, families finding hope. The idea of giving back on such a scale tugged at his heart, a chance to make a real difference in Brooksville. Could he find a way to seize this opportunity without losing himself? After hours of wrestling with his thoughts, pacing the worn floorboards of his home, Marcus made his choice. He'd accept the offer, but only on his terms. No way was he becoming a pawn in the Montgomerys' game. If they wanted to reward him, it would be for his community, not their agenda. Later that day, his heart pounding with resolve, he dialed the number from the card Bennett had given him. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to the representative on the other end. "I've made my decision," he said, each word deliberate. "I'm willing to accept the reward, but there are conditions." The man sounded surprised, maybe even intrigued. "We're listening," he replied, his tone cautious. Marcus took a deep breath, his vision clear. I want the resources to build a community center in my neighborhood, he said, a place where kids can go after school, where adults can get job training and education, and where families can find support. And I want a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, to give them a shot at college.
Can you picture it? A beacon of hope, right here in Brooksville.
There was a long pause, the faint murmur of discussion on the other end. Marcus's heart raced. Would they agree? Finally, the representative spoke. Mr. Williams, we appreciate your proposal. We'll need to discuss this with the family, but I believe we can come to an agreement. Relief flooded through Marcus, a wave of hope washing away his doubts. He'd taken control, turning a potential trap into a chance to do good. The representative promised to follow up soon, and Marcus hung up, his hands trembling with a mix of excitement and nerves. Had he really just done that? The next few weeks were a whirlwind, a dizzying blur of plans and possibilities. The Montgomery family agreed to his terms, and Marcus found himself at the heart of something incredible. Architects sketched blueprints, community leaders shared ideas, and educators crafted programs to make the community center a reality. The scholarship fund took shape too, promising brighter futures for kids who'd never dared to dream big. Marcus was everywhere, his days filled with meetings and decisions, his nights buzzing with the thrill of what was to come.
And the black SUV?
Once a symbol of fear, it now trailed him like a guardian, its presence no longer menacing but a sign of the support at his disposal.
Can you believe the transformation?
From anxiety to empowerment, all because Marcus stood his ground. Despite this newfound influence, Marcus stayed true to himself. He still chatted with neighbors over picket fences, helped out at the local church, and offered a hand wherever it was needed. His life had changed, but his heart hadn't. The community center rose from the ground, its walls echoing with promise. It became a haven where people from all walks of life gathered, sharing laughter, learning, and hope. The scholarship fund opened doors, sending kids to college who'd once thought it impossible. One sunny afternoon, Marcus walked past the center, pausing as the sound of children playing basketball filled the air. Their joyous shouts warmed his soul, and he smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over him. This was it, the reason for it all. Using what he'd been given to lift others up, that was his calling. As time passed, Marcus's story spread through Brooksville like wildfire. People whispered in awe about how one act of kindness had sparked a transformation, not just for him but for the entire town. The ripple effect of that night on the roadside, when he'd stopped to help Sarah, had touched countless lives. Yet Marcus remained humble, never forgetting his roots or the values that guided him. He mentored young people, offering guidance with the same warmth he'd always shown, now backed by resources that amplified his impact. Oh, how his heart swelled with pride, not for himself, but for his community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus sat on his porch, reflecting on his journey. The black SUV was parked across the street, a quiet reminder of the path he'd walked. It no longer felt out of place. It was part of his story, a symbol of the choices he'd made and the change he'd sparked. Sarah had stayed in touch, visiting the community center, her eyes bright with purpose. Inspired by Marcus's kindness, she'd found her own calling in giving back, and their friendship grew, rooted in mutual respect and a shared mission to make a difference. Could he have imagined this bond back on that dark road? As Marcus gazed out at Brooksville, its familiar streets glowing in the twilight, he knew his life had changed in ways he'd never dreamed possible. But at his core, he was still the same man, humble, kind, driven by a desire to help others. The wealth and influence he'd gained were just tools, nothing more, to be used for something greater. His heart was full, not with pride, but with gratitude for the journey, the people, and the power of a single act of kindness to change the world. Oh, what a revelation was dawning in Marcus Turner's heart as he sat on his porch, the Brooksville sunset painting the sky in fiery hues. The truth hit him like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't the Montgomery's dazzling reward that had changed everything, no way. It was that one simple act of kindness, stopping to help Sarah on that lonely road, that had set the world spinning in new directions.
Can you believe it?
Every action, no matter how small, held the power to reshape lives, to ripple out and transform a community. That knowledge, burning bright in his soul, was the greatest treasure of all. As Marcus stood, a deep peace settled over him, warm and steady like a favorite blanket. He'd made his decision, and oh, it felt so right. His life wasn't just about him anymore, It was about Brooksville, its people, their future, and the endless possibilities stretching out like stars in the night sky. Closing the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the quiet house, Marcus knew he was ready for whatever lay ahead. The road was uncertain, but with the lessons he'd learned and the lives he'd touched, he was brimming with confidence. Could he face the future with the same kindness and grit that had brought him this far? You bet he could. As months rolled by, the impact of Marcus's choice spread through Brooksville like gentle waves on a pond, touching every corner of the town. The community center he dreamed of was no longer just a vision. It was a vibrant, bustling hub, its doors flung wide to anyone seeking knowledge, support, or a place to belong. Kids raced through its halls, their laughter echoing. Adults found new skills in classrooms. Families leaned on each other in tough times. The scholarship fund? Oh, it was a game changer. It had already lifted several bright young students, giving them chances they'd never dared to dream of, college careers, futures that sparkled with promise. But the deepest change, the one that glowed like a quiet ember, was in Marcus himself. Can you see it? The man who'd once lived a simple, unassuming life was now a beacon of hope, his heart still humble but his reach boundless. On a crisp autumn morning, with leaves crunching underfoot and a chill in the air, Marcus stood outside the community center, watching volunteers plant trees along a freshly paved walkway. Their laughter and chatter filled the air, a joyful symphony that stood in stark contrast to the somber stillness that had once hung over this part of town.
What a transformation!
Quite a sight, isn't it? A familiar voice called, warm and bright. Marcus turned, his face lighting up as he saw Sarah Montgomery, her smile as radiant as the morning sun. She'd become a regular in Brooksville, her early wariness replaced by a contagious enthusiasm for the changes unfolding around them. It really is. Marcus replied, his voice a mix of pride and awe. Sometimes I pinch myself, wondering if this is real. How much has changed? Sarah nodded, her eyes sweeping over the lively scene. You've done something incredible here, Marcus, she said, her voice full of wonder.
Juve ogivam pipolop, arison tu believ in better days.
Marcus shook his head, a shy grin tugging at his lips, a habit whenever praise came his way. We've all done this together, he said. I just pointed us in the right direction, you know? Oh, his humility was something else. As they stood there, soaking in the energy of a community coming alive, Marcus's mind wandered back to the journey that had brought him here. Accepting the Montgomerys' offer, but on his own terms, had been a turning point, like opening a door to a world he'd never imagined. It had brought opportunities beyond his wildest dreams, but also challenges that tested his resolve. Could he have foreseen this path that night he helped Sarah? Just then, a familiar figure approached, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. James Bennett, the man who'd first brought the Montgomerys' offer, strode toward them, his suit as sharp as ever. But there was something new in his eyes, respect, maybe? Mr. Johnson, Bennett said, extending a hand with a firm grip. Marcus shook it, noting the strength behind it. Not interrupting, I hope? Bennett asked, his tone smooth but warm. Not at all. Marcus replied, gesturing to the scene around them. Sarah and I were just admiring the progress. Bennett's gaze roamed over the community center, the volunteers, the newly planted trees. It's truly remarkable what you've accomplished, he said, his voice carrying a weight Marcus had come to recognize. The Montgomerys' approval was rare, and it always came with strings. The family is impressed. Bennett added, and Marcus felt a twinge of caution. Impressed? What did that mean? I'm glad to hear that, Marcus said carefully, his tone steady. But I hope they understand this isn't about impressing anyone. It's about doing what's right for the community. Bennett's expression stayed neutral, but a flicker of admiration danced in his eyes. Of course, he said. That's precisely why the family is interested in expanding the scope of your work. Expanding?
Marcus schulderten said, a familia runis creeping in.
He'd known this was coming. The Montgomerys weren't the type to stop at one success. They saw potential in him, and they wanted to harness it. But at what cost? Expanding how? Marcus asked, his voice measured, every word deliberate. Bennett reached into his suit jacket, pulling out a sleek folder that gleamed in the sunlight. We've drawn up some proposals, he said, handing it to Marcus. The family believes your model could be replicated in other communities across the state, maybe even nationally. Marcus took the folder, its weight heavy in his hands, not just paper but a crossroads, Another moment that could redefine his life.
A national network?
Could he really take on something that big? I'll look it over, he said, tucking the folder under his arm, but I can't make any promises.
Maille à tessir, in Brooksville.
Bennett nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Of course.
Take your time.
We're in no rush. With a polite nod, he excused himself, leaving Marcus and Sarah alone, the folder a silent challenge between them. Sarah watched Bennett's retreating figure, a slight frown creasing her brow. They're not going to let up, you know, she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. Once the Montgomerys see potential, they pursue it like hounds on a trail. Marcus sighed, the folder's weight a constant reminder of the stakes. I know, he said, his voice low. But I can't lose sight of why I started this. It was never about building some empire or becoming a big-shot philanthropist. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch steady and reassuring. I know that, Marcus, she said, her eyes warm. That's why you're the right person for this.
You won't let the power go to your head.
Oh, her faith in him was like a lifeline, grounding him in the whirlwind of possibilities. As the day unfolded, Marcus threw himself into the work he loved, the community center buzzing with life. He helped volunteers plant more trees, their shovels biting into the earth with purpose. He sat with staff, dreaming up new programs to inspire the town's youth. He even met with local business owners, their eyes bright with ideas to support the center's mission. By evening, he was bone-tired but brimming with fulfillment, his heart full of the community's spirit. Walking home under a starlit sky, the black SUV trailed at a discreet distance, no longer a source of fear but a symbol of the power he now wielded, and the responsibilities that came with it. Can you imagine how that shift must have felt? From dread to duty, all because he'd stayed true to his values. At home, Marcus sank into his favorite chair, the folder from Bennett sitting on the coffee table like a silent challenge. He stared at it, torn between curiosity and caution.
What did he told?
Finally, with a deep breath, he opened it, the pages crisp under his fingers. The proposals were bold, almost dizzying. The Montgomerys envisioned a network of community centers across the state, each one modeled after Brooksville's success. They wanted Marcus to lead it all, to be the face of a movement that could change thousands of lives. Excitement surged through him, but so did trepidation. The potential for good was massive, but so was the risk of losing his way. He'd seen how power could twist even the best intentions, how greed or ego could corrupt. Could he stay grounded, or would this pull him under? Late into the night, Marcus pored over the proposals, scribbling notes, wrestling with the decision. His mind whirled with possibilities and fears, sleep a distant hope. By morning, he was still undecided, his heart a tug-of-war between ambition and caution. He went through his routine, coffee brewing, a quick breakfast of toast and eggs, a walk through Brooksville's familiar streets. As he passed homes where families struggled, where kids faced uncertain futures, the weight of his potential impact pressed down. Could he make a difference on an even bigger scale? At the community center, he was surprised to find Aunt Clara waiting, her weathered face creased with a knowing smile. I had a feeling you'd need some of my famous advice today, she said, patting his cheek with a warmth that felt like home. Marcus chuckled, her intuition never failing to amaze. You're right about that, he said. How about we grab a coffee and talk? In a quiet corner of the diner's cafeteria, steaming mugs in hand, Marcus poured out his heart, sharing the Montgomerys' proposal and his fears.
Aunt Clara listened, her eyes sharp, missing nothing.
When he finished, she paused, her words chosen with care. You know, Marcus, she began, her voice gentle but firm, when I was young, I faced a choice like yours. Not about money or influence, but about my life's path. I could have stayed here, married the boy everyone expected, lived the life laid out for me.
Or he could leave, chase my dream, face the unknown.
Marcus leaned in, intrigued. Aunt Clara's past was a mystery he rarely glimpsed. What did you do? He asked, hanging on her every word. A wistful smile curved her lips. I left, she said. I traveled, studied, saw things I never could have imagined. It was terrifying and thrilling, all at once. But I never regretted it, because I was true to myself. She reached across, her hand covering his. The question isn't whether to take this chance, Marcus. It's whether you can stay true to your values if you do. Her words struck deep, a clarion call to his core. But how do I know I won't lose my way? He asked, his voice raw. Aunt Clara's eyes twinkled with wisdom. You can't know for sure, that's life. But I know you, Marcus. You've got a strong moral compass. Keep listening to it, and you'll find your path. Oh, her faith in him was a gift, a guiding star. As they parted, Marcus felt clarity dawning, Aunt Clara's words echoing in his heart. Over the next few days, he dove into the proposal, consulting community leaders, seeking mentors' advice, and reflecting in quiet moments. Finally, he was ready. He arranged a meeting with Bennett at the community center, the familiar space grounding him. As Bennett arrived, his suit a stark contrast to the center's warmth, Marcus felt a calm certainty. Mr. Bennett, he began, I've thought about your proposal. Bennett leaned forward, eager. Marcus took a breath, his vision clear. I'm interested, but with conditions. He laid out his plan, a network of community centers, each rooted in its community's needs, led by local voices, with Marcus overseeing from Brooksville. Could he make this dream a reality without losing himself? Oh, what a fire burned in Marcus Turner's heart as he stood in the modest office of the Brooksville Community Center, laying out his vision to James Bennett with a conviction that could move mountains. I won't become some distant figurehead, he declared, his voice steady but brimming with passion. I need to stay connected to the people we're trying to help. And I want safeguards in place to make sure the focus stays on community service, not on building some corporate empire. Can you imagine the courage it took to set those terms, to stand firm against the weight of the Montgomery family's influence? Bennett, with his unreadable expression, listened intently, his polished exterior giving nothing away.
Allons silence in the air, tiquis anticipation.
What would he say? Marcus held his breath, his heart pounding like a drum. Mr. Johnson, Bennett finally said, his voice measured, I have to admit, when the family first suggested this expanded role for you, I had my doubts. I wondered if you had the ambition for it. He paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, a rare crack in his polished facade. I see now that I underestimated you. Your ambition isn't for personal gain but for the greater good. That's refreshing. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a surge of relief washing over him like a cool breeze. So you think the family will agree to my terms? He asked, hope flickering in his chest. Bennett nodded, his eyes glinting with something like respect.
Ido.
In fact, I think they'll be impressed by your foresight and commitment to your principles. It's precisely those qualities that make you the right person for this role.
Oh, what a moment.
As Bennett left, promising to draft an agreement incorporating Marcus's conditions, Marcus was swept up in a whirlwind of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into a bigger world, one bursting with potential but fraught with challenges. Could he rise to meet them? Over the next few months, Marcus dove headfirst into the work of expanding the community center model, his heart ablaze with purpose. He traveled to towns and cities across the state, his worn boots treading new paths, his ears open to the hopes and fears of local leaders and residents. Each new center was a puzzle, demanding careful planning and heartfelt collaboration. Can you picture him, sitting in small-town diners, listening to stories of struggle and dreams, his notebook filled with ideas to make a difference? Through it all, Marcus stayed grounded, his values like a compass guiding him home. He made time to connect with each community, sharing meals, swapping stories, and building trust with the people he served. Transparency was his mantra. He insisted on publishing regular reports, detailing every dollar spent and every life touched. The work was grueling, leaving him exhausted but fulfilled, his soul nourished by the transformations he witnessed. In communities mirroring Brooksville's revival, children who once seemed lost now thrived in after-school programs, their laughter a song of hope. Adults who'd faced dead-end jobs learned new skills, landing work that lit up their faces. Families teetering on the edge found the support to hold tight, their bonds stronger than ever. Wasn't it incredible, the power of collective care? But oh, the challenges grew as the network expanded. Marcus found himself navigating treacherous political waters, clashing with stubborn local governments, and batting away opportunists itching to profit from his work. One crisis hit hard in a small city where a corrupt mayor, threatened by the community center's influence, launched a vicious smear campaign. False rumors swirled, painting Marcus as a schemer, the center as a front for shady dealings. Can you imagine the sting of those lies? In that moment, Marcus glimpsed the raw power he now held. A few phone calls to the Montgomerys could have toppled the mayor, their Their influence was that vast. But Marcus knew, deep in his gut, that wielding such power would betray everything he stood for. No way would he stoop to that. Instead, he chose a bolder path, one rooted in his heart. He traveled to the city, not with lawyers or spin doctors, but with an open mind and a willingness to listen. He met with residents, heard their fears, and spoke honestly about the center's mission. He even invited the mayor to see the work firsthand, his door wide open. Was it risky? You bet. There were moments when Marcus doubted his approach, when the mayor's venom seemed unstoppable. But slowly, like dawn breaking, the tide turned. Faced with the undeniable good the center was doing, kids learning, families healing, the mayor became its loudest champion.
Oh, what a victory for grâce au change.
Marcus's belief was reaffirmed. Real change came from working alongside people, empowering them to shape their own futures, not from lording power over them. As months stretched into years, Marcus watched in awe as the network of community centers blossomed, each one a unique reflection of its community's spirit, yet all bound by a shared mission: to uplift, empower, and unite. Can you see it? Centers springing up like wildflowers, each one a testament to the human spirit. Through it all, Marcus stayed true to himself, his roots deep in Brooksville soil. He still lived in his modest home, its familiar creaks a comfort. He chatted with neighbors over morning coffee, helped at local events, his smile as warm as ever. The black SUV still trailed him, a reminder of the powerful forces he now moved among, but it no longer loomed like a threat. It was just a tool, one of many he used to do good. How far he'd come from that first night of fear. 5 years after helping Sarah on that lonely road, Marcus stood outside the Brooksville Community Center on a crisp autumn day, the air alive with anticipation. A crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new wing dedicated to healthcare for the underserved, a dream made real. As Marcus prepared his speech, his eyes scanned the sea of faces, landing on those he loved. There was Aunt Clara, her eyes sparkling with pride, Derek and Angela, now pillars of the center's work, and at the back Sarah Montgomery, her smile a quiet beacon of their shared journey. Marcus took a deep breath, stepping to the podium, his heart full to bursting. 5 years ago, he began, his voice clear and strong, I made a choice. A choice to seize an unexpected opportunity and use it to benefit not just me, but all of us. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, drinking in their hope. Standing here, seeing what we've built together, I know it was the right choice. But it wasn't just mine, it was ours. Every volunteer who gave their time, every child who came to learn, every family who found strength in tough times, you all chose this. You believed we could make a difference, could build something that matters. A lump rose in Marcus's throat as he pressed on, his voice thick with emotion. I've traveled far these past years, seen communities transform in ways I never thought possible.
And you know what I veut lire, Ned?
The power to change the world doesn't come from money or influence, it comes from people. People who care, who work hard, who keep going when it feels impossible. He gestured to the new wing, its walls gleaming with promise. This building and all the others like it across the country, they're not monuments to one person or family. They're monuments to the human spirit, to our kindness and compassion. They're proof that when we come together, when we see the best in each other and work toward a shared goal, there's nothing we can't do. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that lifted Marcus's heart. He stepped back, pride mingling with humility, his resolve to keep going stronger than ever.
What a moment.
Later, as the crowd explored the new wing, Marcus stole a quiet moment with Sarah, the buzz of activity around them a living testament to their work. You know, Sarah said, wonder in her voice, when I met you that night, I never could have imagined this. Marcus chuckled, his eyes crinkling. Neither could I. Life's got a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? It sure does. Sarah replied, her smile soft. In that moment, Marcus knew true change came from people like them, ordinary folks with big hearts, working together. The power he'd gained was just a tool to amplify the kindness that had always driven him. His life had transformed, but at his core, he was still Marcus, dedicated to lifting others, anchored by the values that had carried him this far. What would you do, faced with a life-changing offer after a single act of kindness? Would you dive in, or pause to weigh the cost? If this tale of twists, dilemmas, and the power of good has touched you, consider subscribing to my channel.
I pour m'aider into these stories, and your support means the world.
Thanks for joining this journey.